All right, let's dive into this, huh? Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory.
Yeah, one of those iconic paintings, right?
Definitely iconic, and we're going to really try to unpack it today.
Sounds good.
Our main guide for this deep dive is going to be this really cool video I found
Oh, yeah.
from the YouTube channel Great Art Explained.
I've seen some of their stuff. It's pretty good.
Yeah, they do a good job. Really interesting. So we're going to use that as like our jumping off point. We'll talk about the symbolism in the painting,
Of course, gotta have the
deeper meaning.
always a deeper meaning with Dali.
Right. And we're also going to get into some stuff about Dali's life too, so.
I always like that, getting a little bit of context about the artist makes the work even more interesting.
Yeah, totally. So get ready, because we are about to get surreal.
Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
So, I mean, where do we even begin with a painting like this?
Right. I mean, it's so packed with symbolism. Where do you even start? I guess for me, you can't really talk about Dali without talking about dreams. And the subconscious, right? Like, he was a huge fan of Freud, but he didn't just, sit around and read Freud.
Right.
He actually came up with these techniques to induce what he called hypnagogia, this kind of state between sleep and wakefulness.
Oh, so he was like trying to access his subconscious.
Totally.
Wow.
He would like hold a key over a plate, and then as soon as he started to doze off, the key would fall.
Oh, like the sound would wake him up.
Exactly. That clang would jolt him awake, and then he would immediately write down or sketch whatever he was experiencing.
So basically this painting is like a visual representation of like
Kind of, yeah.
one of those moments
You could say that.
when he's like half asleep.
I mean, it's definitely got that dreamlike feel to it, right?
Yeah, totally.
Even though the style is super realistic, the imagery itself is so strange and unsettling. It's like looking into a dream.
It's interesting that he was doing this like around the time of like the Surrealist movement, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, Surrealism came about after World War I, and there was this whole rejection, reason and logic. It was all about embracing the irrational, the subconscious.
And Dali just like fit right into that.
Oh, absolutely. He was a key figure in the movement.
So when people, like the average person on the street, thinks about Salvador Dali, they probably think of melting clocks, right?
Yeah, those melting clocks are like his trademark.
Yeah, so what's the deal with those?
Well, they symbolize the fluidity of time, right? That time isn't fixed and rigid, but it can kind of warp and melt and distort.
And I know there's a connection there to Einstein's theory of relativity.
Exactly. Einstein's theory was like a bomb going off in the scientific world at the time.
Can you explain that for those of us who don't have a physics degree?
Basically, Einstein said that time isn't absolute, it's relative to the observer. So, like, time can actually slow down or speed up depending on your frame of reference.
Okay. So the melting clocks are like a visual representation of that idea.
Exactly. It's like Dali was taking this abstract scientific concept and turning it into something we can see and feel.
That is super cool. But didn't he also say he got the idea from melting cheese? Like camembert cheese?
Yeah, he did say that. That was Dali, always playing with people's expectations.
So was he being serious or was he just messing with everyone?
Who knows, maybe a bit of both. Later on, he even said that the clocks also symbolize male impotence, which, adds a whole other layer of interpretation.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we've got melting time, but what about the actual setting of the painting? Is that like a real place or is it just like a made-up dreamscape?
It's actually both. Dali based the landscape on the area around his home in Port Liget, Spain. You can even recognize specific landmarks like the Cap de Creus cliffs and Mount Pani in the background.
So even in this surreal dreamscape, he's grounding it in reality, in his own personal experience.
Exactly. And one detail that really stands out in that landscape is the dead olive tree.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that.
And that's significant because the olive tree is traditionally a symbol of peace. So having it be dead here is pretty striking.
Yeah, it definitely creates this feeling of unease, like something's not quite right.
Right. And remember, this painting was created between World War I and the Spanish Civil War, so that dead tree really represents that peace has been disrupted, that the world is in a state of turmoil.
And I know Dali was really into Goya, whose Disaster of War series also uses those dead trees to represent suffering.
You got it. And Dali actually painted a piece that he claimed predicted the Spanish Civil War, and it directly referenced Goya's imagery.
Wow, so he was using art to comment on the political climate of his time, but in this really subtle, symbolic way.
Exactly. It wasn't just about pretty pictures for Dali. His art was always engaged with the world around him.
Which brings us back to those melting clocks, I guess. It's not just about Einstein's theories, it's also about how time feels subjective and unreliable, especially during times of turmoil and uncertainty.
Right. The clocks all show different times, which further emphasizes that idea that time isn't fixed and linear, but it's fragmented, just like memory.
Okay, so we've got this melting time, this landscape that's rooted in both reality and dream, and this feeling of unease and uncertainty. But there's also that mysterious figure in the painting.
Right, that kind of creepy, almost melted-looking figure.
Yeah, what's that all about?
Most art historians believe it's a self-portrait of Dali, either sleeping or maybe even dead.
Okay, so that just adds another layer of ambiguity to the whole thing, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, for sure. And speaking of ambiguity, we gotta talk about the ants.
The ants.
Yeah, those ants crawling all over the watch. Dali had this lifelong fascination with mortality, probably stemming from losing his brother when he was young and then his mother when he was a teenager.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. So the ants symbolize death.
Exactly, along with all the other insects in the painting. They represent decay and decomposition.
So he's contracting the permanence of death with this idea of time being fluid and ever-changing.
That's a really interesting observation.
And I guess the fact that the ants are crawling over the watch, which is made of metal, makes it even more unsettling.
Right, like time itself is being devoured by decay.
It's almost like he's saying that even time can't escape death.
And let's not forget about that fly on the clock face, too. Historically, flies have often symbolized the fleeting nature of life.
So it's all connected.
Yeah.
The melting clocks, the ants, the fly, they all point back to this idea of impermanence, of everything eventually succumbing to the passage of time.
Exactly. It's a pretty profound meditation on time and memory and death, all wrapped up in this one surreal image.
So this painting is a lot deeper than I initially thought. It's not just about weird melting clocks. It's about our relationship with time, memory, and the inevitability of death.
Exactly.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface
Well,
here.
for sure. There's so much more to uncover.
Look about Dali himself.
Yeah, I mean, the man behind the melting clocks was a fascinating character himself. Yeah, so Dali, right. He ends up in America with Gala.
Right.
During all that craziness with the Spanish Civil War and then World War II.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, like picturing him, this eccentric surrealist dude trying to navigate American culture.
It's wild.
Yeah, right? Like from this avant-garde art scene, he's suddenly thrust into Broadway and Hollywood.
It's like a whole different world.
Yeah. So, I mean, did he embrace all that?
Oh, he did. Full force. He was designing sets for operas and ballets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then he worked with Hitchcock on that dream sequence for Spellbound.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. It's so trippy.
Totally. And then, get this, he even worked with Walt Disney.
What? Dali and Disney?
Yeah, on this animated short film called Destino.
Really? I had no idea.
It's a pretty wild little film. You should check it out.
I definitely will.
Yeah, so he was all over the place trying all these different things.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he was always up for pushing the boundaries, experimenting.
Like constantly pushing the envelope.
But I also read that some critics started to turn on him a little bit during this period. Oh, yeah. Like they were saying he was becoming too commercial.
Yeah, there was that sense that maybe he'd lost some of his edge, that he was more interested in fame than in, making groundbreaking art.
Right, like the whole sellout accusation.
It's a tough one, right? Because on the one hand, you want artists to be successful.
Of course.
But then on the other hand, you don't want them to compromise their vision just to make a buck.
Right, right.
It's a tricky balance.
And I mean, Dali, he was a master of self-promotion,
Yeah,
He loved the spotlight.
totally. You got to remember, though, he was also a product of his time. This was the post-war era. Mass media was exploding. Celebrity culture was taking off.
Yeah, of course.
So, I mean, it's natural that that stuff would have influenced him.
Right, yeah.
It's hard to imagine him being any other way.
So let's talk about Gala for a minute.
Yeah.
Because she was, way more than just his muse, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, she was his lover, obviously, but also his business manager, his confidant. Yeah, and a frequent model for his paintings.
I mean, their relationship was pretty unconventional, right?
And you could say that.
The age difference, the rumors of open relationships.
Yeah, there was always a lot of speculation about that.
It just seems like such a complex, intense partnership.
Full of passion, drama, creative energy. I mean, their relationship was like a whole other work of art in itself.
And then she dies.
Yeah.
Right, in 82.
Yeah.
And it just completely devastates.
Oh, totally. I mean, he was heartbroken. He basically became a recluse after that.
Really?
Yeah, his health went downhill pretty quickly.
Hmm.
And then he died 7 years later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in '89, while listening to his favorite opera, Tristan and Isolde.
Oh, wow. That's kind of beautiful in a way.
It is, right? I
Yeah.
mean, for a guy who was all about embracing the strange and the absurd, it's fitting that even his death had this, like, operatic quality to it.
Totally. Yeah.
So we talked about Dali embracing American culture,
Yeah.
but there's another side to his story that's, well, a little bit more complicated.
Oh, right. His relationship with Franco.
Yeah, the Spanish dictator.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that, you know? Like, how could this guy who is so avant-garde, so seemingly progressive, be friends with a fascist dictator?
Right.
Just seems so contradictory.
It's a touchy subject for sure, and there's been a lot of debate about it.
I bet.
Some people say Dali was a straight-up fascist sympathizer,
Oh, wow.
while others say he was just an opportunist using his connections to Franco to advance his career.
So, which is it?
I mean, it's hard to say for sure. I think it's important to, like, consider the historical context, you know?
Yeah.
And also to acknowledge that there are a lot of different perspectives on this.
Right.
I mean, we can't deny the suffering that Franco caused,
Right.
but we have to be sensitive to how Dali's actions might have been perceived by the people who lived through that.
That's a good point.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It's definitely something to think about, you know? Like, how do we reconcile this part of Dali's life with everything else we know about him?
Yeah, it's one of those things that just makes you realize that even the most brilliant, creative people are still human, with all the flaws and contradictions that come with that.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that nobody's perfect, even our artistic heroes.
Exactly.
So maybe let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Dali's legacy.
Yeah, good idea.
Because, I mean, his impact on the art world is undeniable, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Even beyond the art world.
Right, like his imagery is everywhere, those melting clocks, the lobster telephone, that Mae West lip sofa.
Yeah, it's like his stuff is seeped into pop culture.
Totally. And it's still so recognizable, so influential.
But why do you think that is? What is it about Dali's work that continues to resonate with people all these years later?
I think he tapped into something primal, you know? Something deep within the human psyche.
Like what?
Like our dreams, our desires, our fears, the stuff that we don't always want to confront.
Right.
And he brought those things out into the open through his art.
Yeah, it's true. He wasn't afraid to be provocative, even disturbing sometimes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He wanted to shock, to make you question everything you thought you knew.
But beneath all the theatrics, you know, there's real artistic vision there.
For sure. Like, he was incredibly skilled, technically brilliant. He was a master draftsman, a phenomenal painter.
Yeah.
And he was constantly experimenting, trying new things, pushing the boundaries of what art could be.
So it's like, even though he might have courted controversy and all that,
Right.
his legacy as a true artistic visionary is pretty secure, right?
Oh, yeah, I'd say so. He changed the way we think about art. He showed us that it can be strange, it can be challenging, it can be deeply personal, and it can still connect with a huge audience.
And I think his story is also a reminder that art doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
It's always a product of the artist's life, their experiences, the world around them.
Exactly. Like, Dali's life was this wild mix of contradictions and triumphs and scandals, and his art reflects that complexity.
Right.
And I think that's also what makes it so fascinating, you know? Because it reminds us that even the most celebrated artists are still human with all the flaws and messiness that comes with that.
Yeah, it's a good reminder.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
What do you say we move on to the last part, try to sum everything up?
Sounds good to me. Man, we have really gone deep on Dali, haven't we?
Yeah, it's been a trip.
It really has. From those melting clocks to, like, his whole life story and those political ties.
It's wild.
Yeah. Like, I feel like I've just woken up from a Dali painting.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's like we've explored this whole surreal landscape, but I'm still kind of processing it all, you know?
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Which I think is, like, a sign of good art.
Right.
Like, it stays with you.
Definitely. It makes you think.
Yeah, long after you've seen it. So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
What do you think are, like, the key takeaways? Like, what do you think Dali was really trying to say with his work?
Oh, I think one thing that's always struck me about Dali is his, like, willingness to explore the subconscious, you know? He wasn't afraid of the dark stuff, the weird stuff, the irrational stuff.
Yeah, he just went there.
He went there,
Yeah.
and he brought it to life in his art.
And he did it with such skill, too. Like, the way he could paint so realistically.
Yeah.
but then create these scenes that are just so bizarre and illogical.
It's almost like a magic trick.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like, it's mind-boggling. So what do you think he was saying about, like, our perception of reality?
Well, I think he was trying to shake things up, like wake us up from this kind of like ordinary way of seeing the world
Oh, yeah.
and show us that there's like this whole other reality out there.
This hidden reality.
Yeah, that we can access if we just like let go of our need for everything to make sense.
Right, like embrace the absurd.
Exactly.
It's all about that.
And I think there's something really liberating about that, like letting go of all those rules and expectations and just like diving into the unknown.
So Dali, the man, right?
Yeah.
Like, obviously a complex legacy. Brilliant artist, showman, provocateur.
Right, and not without his flaws.
Yeah, definitely not perfect.
Yeah.
But there's no question that he had a huge impact,
Huge impact.
both on art and culture.
And his work is still so popular today.
It really is. I mean, you see his imagery everywhere.
It's iconic.
It is. So why do you think that is? Like, why do people still connect with his work so strongly?
I think it's because he was able to like tap into something universal, like those deep-seated fears and desires that we all share.
Right.
And he did it in a way that was both like visually stunning and intellectually stimulating.
Yeah, like he made you think, but he also entertained you at the same time.
Exactly. He didn't take himself too seriously, like there's always this element of playfulness in his work.
Yeah, that's true.
So like what can we, the average person take away from all this, from this deep dive into Dali?
Yeah, good question.
I think for me, it's a reminder to like not be afraid to embrace our own individuality. Like Dali was never afraid to be himself, even when it meant being different, even when it meant being controversial.
And he encouraged us to do the same, right? To question everything, to explore our own imaginations.
To dream big.
To dream big and to not be afraid of, like, the weird and the wonderful.
And I think that's a pretty powerful message,
It is.
Especially in a world that's constantly trying to tell us who to be and how to think.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on.
I agree.
So there you have it, folks, our deep dive into the persistence of memory. It's a painting that continues to fascinate and inspire and make us question everything we thought we knew about time and memory and reality itself.
Dali would have loved that.
We would, yeah. Thanks for joining us on this surreal journey.